There are stories buried so deep in history that even the dead seem to guard them. Files sealed, names erased, and in a small town in Pennsylvania, a sound that no one could explain. June 1889. When the Johnstown Flood drowned a valley, it left behind more than wreckage. It left behind two girls, twins, who were born in the aftermath, and who began to hear something the living were not meant to hear. Witnesses said they could predict a death by the way they screamed. Doctors called it hysteria. But one man, Dr. Ezra Tilling, called it a gift, and he devoted the rest of his life to recording what they heard in the final seconds before death. By 1904, his laboratory on Prospect Hill had become a place the townspeople refused to enter, and when state inspectors finally forced the doors open, they found his instruments still running, recording nothing but silence. This is the story of the Silence Twins, a story sealed in a wooden crate beneath the Johnstown Courthouse. Until now. Before we continue with the story of Dr. Ezra Tilling and the children he claimed to have rescued from the Johnstown Flood, take a moment to subscribe and ring the bell. Comment what state or country you're listening from. Now, let's go back to Pennsylvania, the summer after the flood. When the South Fork Dam broke on May 31st, 1889, the water came like a black wall, 40 feet high, rolling down the valley at the speed of a train. In less than an hour, it erased an entire American town. More than 2,000 souls were lost. Bodies were found as far away as Pittsburgh. The valley stank of oil, mud, and human decay for months. But history books like to end the story there, with the tragedy, the rebuilding, the triumph of the human spirit. They rarely mention what came after, the silence. By the winter of 1890, Johnstown was half alive, half embalmed. New homes rose on the bones of the old, and the Cambria ironworks roared again. But at night, the sound of the furnaces echoed like voices calling from the floodplain. People said it was only metal cooling in the cold air. Others said the town itself was remembering. It was during this uneasy rebirth that a physician named Dr. Ezra Whitmore Tilling arrived from Baltimore and purchased a plot of land on Prospect Hill, overlooking what was left of the river. From there, he said, he could hear the valley breathe. Tilling was, by every public measure, a man of science and mercy. Born in 1848, he had served as a field medic during the final years of the Civil War. His medical training in Charleston was never fully completed. The records stop in 1865, when he was accused of unauthorized experimentation upon the dead. The charges vanished, as such things often did for men of education. By 1870, he had resurfaced in Pennsylvania, practicing electrotherapeutic medicine, a strange new field that used electricity to dissect the nervous system. When the flood came, Tilling volunteered at the temporary morgue on Main Street. Survivors remembered how calm he was among the bodies. He worked tirelessly, cataloging, measuring, dissecting, identifying. When others faltered, he continued. They called him a hero in the local papers, a man of unspeakable endurance and mercy. Yet few noticed what he quietly collected, small samples of tissue, bone fragments, organs sealed in jars. By November 1889, he had been granted permission to open a private infirmary in his home, the Prospect Institute of Nervous Disorders. It was there, on the 3rd floor, that the twins were brought. Their mother, Margaret Dorrance, had been 8 months pregnant when the dam collapsed. She was found clinging to the wreck of a freight car, half conscious, soaked to the marrow. She gave birth that same night under Tilling's care. 2 girls, premature, blue, and silent. Neither made a sound. The doctor recorded it himself. Twins born during the deluge, both female, no auditory response, pupils unreactive to Bell stimulus, mother comatose, prognosis terminal. Margaret Dorrance died before dawn. The twins were left unnamed, identified in his log as subjects A and B. Tilling kept them. Officially, he adopted them for observation to study what he called the neurological consequences of catastrophe upon the newborn mind. Neighbors suspected otherwise. They said he saw something in their silence that thrilled him. His house on Prospect Hill stood 3 stories tall, built from limestone and the splintered timbers of the flood. Locals called it the House of Breath because its chimneys smoked even when no fire burned. Insurance descriptions list tiled laboratory floors imported from France, iron-barred ward windows, a private study with soundproofed walls, and a cellar unmarked on the building plans, accessible only through the operating room. By 1891, 6 convalescents lived there, all women or children who had lost their hearing or sight in the disaster. The twins were kept apart. Visitors described them as pale, frail things, moving perfectly together, reacting before the other did. When one startled, the other turned her head an instant before the sound. A letter from Sister Agnes Morley, dated March 3, 1891, still survives. In it she wrote, "The children do not speak, yet seem to hear him before he enters. Last night they began to cry just as the fever took little Anna H., who passed before dawn. I believe they knew before we did." Between 1890 and 1895, 21 deaths occurred within 5 miles of Prospect Hill, all ruled natural. But witnesses began noticing a pattern. Each time before a death, the twins would scream in unison, sometimes hours before, sometimes a full day. Neighbors began to count the intervals. When the girls screamed, someone would die within 24 hours. At first it was a grim coincidence, then a superstition, but when the pastor's wife collapsed after one of their fits, people began to whisper that the children brought death with them. Dr. Tilling dismissed it as hysteria. He called the episodes hysterical echolalia, sympathetic outbursts common in twins. He barred the windows, silenced the rumors, and locked the gates. Yet the sounds continued, muffled, rhythmic, as if the house itself were breathing with them. Those who walked near the property said the earth vibrated faintly like a plucked string. Some swore they could hear 2 voices humming softly behind the shutters, not in harmony, but in warning. Families began to move away from the hill. Meanwhile, Tilling's fame grew. He published papers on auditory residue of catastrophic trauma and reflexive nervous sympathy in monozygotic subjects. He traveled to Philadelphia and New York, lecturing on unearthed, that he called somatic resonance, the idea that consciousness emits a faint tone as life fades. In a letter to a colleague in 1894, he wrote, "I believe consciousness itself emits a tone, a subtle vibration preceding its extinguishment. My girls can hear it. They are the first instruments of a science not yet born." At home, he became a pillar of the community. Sunday lectures in his parlor drew doctors and clergy alike. No one asked about the locked basement. No one mentioned the servants who left in the night, pale and trembling. One nurse, Eleanor Fitch, later wrote in a private affidavit, never published, found decades later in a family Bible. He would take the children downstairs at night, said he was measuring their responses. When they came back, they were shaking. He told me never to repeat what I heard, that the human body has tones better left unstruck. Eleanor vanished in August of 1895. Years later, during the demolition of the house, workers uncovered 3 sealed alcoves under the operating room floor. In one was a small box containing 2 lockets and a scrap of parchment, written in Tilling's own hand. They hear the note before the body gives way. It is not pain they fear. It is the silence that follows. The alcoves were resealed by county order. The remains, according to those who saw them, were unnatural in posture, as if resisting confinement. By the late 1890s, Johnstown had learned to keep its silence. The flood had been rebranded as Triumph. The factories hummed again, and the townspeople spoke less of ghosts. The twins, rarely seen, became a rumor. Pale figures glimpsed in upper windows, singing without sound. Children dared each other to climb the hill at night. They said if you stood close to the gate, you could hear them breathing in unison. From the ashes of a drowned town rose a house of quiet science, and 2 children who could hear what the living were never meant to. And while Johnstown tried to forget, the earth beneath Prospect Hill remembered every sound. The first mention of a surviving witness appears in the Cambria County Coroner's correspondence dated March 11, 1896. The letter refers to a young apprentice, male, aged 19, formerly in service to Dr. Ezra Tilling. His name was Thomas Caleb Reynard, though later records shorten it to T.C. R. Thomas had been orphaned by the flood, like so many others, and was taken in by the Presbyterian orphan home before Tilling offered him a position as an assistant. It was a respectable opportunity: room, board, and the chance to learn medicine. The doctor's word carried weight in town, and no one questioned his motives. For the first months, Reynard described his employer with admiration. His surviving notebook, recovered in 1902 from the ruins of a boarding house fire, contains sketches of surgical instruments, diagrams of the ear, and small, delicate portraits of the twins drawn in pencil. Beneath one, he wrote, "They listen even when they sleep." According to his entries, the twins were nearly 7 years old by then. They spoke rarely, their voices high and tremulous, as if unused to language. Tilling insisted on calling them the instruments. Each evening he conducted what he called response trials, striking a tuning fork while the girls sat motionless with their hands pressed against the floorboards. He claimed they could sense the difference between frequencies that no human ear could detect. Reynard was tasked with keeping records. Every night at 9 he logged their breathing rate, pulse, and what Tilling termed somatic vibration. The boy didn't understand the term, but he noticed the pattern. Whenever someone nearby fell ill, even a stranger passing through town, the girls would begin to tremble hours beforehand, like animals sensing a storm. In one entry dated April 9, 1896, Reynard wrote, "Doctor says the body gives a final whisper before it acquits the flesh. He believes they can hear it. Tonight they woke crying. At dawn, Mrs. Brenner's boy was found drowned in the mill pond." That spring, the doctor grew restless. He began speaking of a resonant contagion, a tone that could move from the dying to the living, carried on breath. Reynard, who had grown superstitious from months of sleepless nights, confessed in later testimony that he started keeping a crucifix in his pocket, though he never dared show it. He noticed other changes in the house. A new cellar door appeared beneath the main staircase, though he had never seen workmen build it. The servants were replaced again, all foreign women who spoke little English. They lasted weeks at most, and the doctor himself began to smell faintly of ether and metal, a scent that lingered even in his clothes. The boy's final months at Prospect Hill are pieced together from fragments of testimony and letters he wrote to a friend in Pittsburgh. One survives only in part, scorched at the edges. He showed me the chart tonight. Names written in columns, dates beside them, like a ledger of debts. At the bottom he wrote mine. He smiled when he saw me look. By early summer, Reynard began suffering from stomach cramps and trembling hands. He believed it to be nerves or perhaps bad food, but the symptoms worsened: weakness, metallic taste, black lines on the gums. The local physician diagnosed mild ague and prescribed quinine. It was, in truth, arsenic poisoning. Still, the boy continued working. He grew thin and pale, and the twins, who rarely acknowledged anyone but the doctor, began watching him constantly. On the night of July the 22nd, 1896, he collapsed while preparing instruments. The doctor forbade outside medical attention, claiming he would manage the case internally. Reynard's last diary entry, written in a shaky hand, reads, "I hear what they hear. It hums behind my eyes. He says it is the body leaving itself. God help me, I think he's right." He died 3 days later. The official cause was consumption. The death certificate bears Tilling's signature. At the funeral, held in a rainstorm, the doctor stood beside the coffin, dry beneath his black umbrella. Witnesses recalled that both twins were present, dressed identically in grey, their faces expressionless. When the coffin was lowered, they began to hum, a low, steady tone that rose and fell with the wind. Those who heard it said it was neither song nor cry, but something between. The boy's few belongings were returned to the orphan home. Among them was a small brass key wrapped in paper. Written on the paper in his handwriting were the words, "Basement, North Wall." For years no one dared use it. The house was still occupied and the doctor's influence strong. But after his death in 1903, when the property changed hands, the key was finally tried. It fit a lock behind the surgery table, a panel so well hidden it might have been part of the wall itself. Behind it was a narrow passage leading to 3 small chambers. Each contained a cot, restraints, and a brass tuning fork fixed to the ceiling. On one cot, faint scratches were visible on the iron frame, the marks of someone trying to rise while paralyzed. The workman reported a smell of burnt sugar and formalin. In the 3rd chamber lay a shattered glass jar and a child's shoe, black with soot. County officials sealed the space and classified the discovery as medical waste of indeterminate nature. No charges were filed, yet a rumor spread among the demolition crew that when they first broke the plaster, they heard 2 small voices whispering from the dark, the sound of children finishing a lullaby. Within weeks, several of those men fell ill with fever and hallucinations. Their families moved away. The official record notes the incidents only as sunstroke during reconstruction. A few years later, in 1905, an anonymous parcel was delivered to the county clerk's office. Inside were several pages from a journal written in Tilling's unmistakable hand. The resonance spreads faster now. It requires only proximity. I can hear the tone at night, echoing through the hill. The girls are instruments no longer. They are transmitters. I have become the receiver. The parcel contained no return address. By then, the house had already been abandoned. The twins were never seen again. Some said Tilling sent them to an asylum in Harrisburg. Others whispered he kept them locked below until the end. When the estate was finally auctioned in 1910, a single item remained unsold, a small brass tuning fork engraved with the initials E.T. It was later donated to the Cambria Historical Society, where it still lies in a drawer marked Unverified Artifact, Prospect Hill. Staff refuse to handle it after dark. They say when the building is quiet, it gives a faint, steady tone, like a breath drawn before a scream. By 1897, Dr. Ezra Tilling had become more than a man. He was an institution. His clinic, Prospect Hill Infirmary, received funding from the Pennsylvania State Medical Society, and his reputation as a pioneer in auditory pathology spread across the region. Newspaper clippings from the Cambria Herald call him a man of science whose patience borders on divine. In truth, his divinity came from the system that made him untouchable. The orphan trains from Pittsburgh still arrived monthly. Survivors of the flood, nameless, paperless children were distributed like property. The doctors, the clergy, the benefactors all claimed their share. Most meant well, some did not. In that ambiguity, monsters learned to hide. Tilling's authority grew precisely because he spoke the language of reform. He talked of progress, curing hysteria, and understanding the soul through the ear. The public wanted hope, not scrutiny, and so long as the orphans disappeared quietly, there was no reason to ask questions. One letter preserved in the county archives reveals the extent of his protection. It's from Sheriff Horace L. Danner, dated September 2nd, 1898. Inquiry concerning noise complaints near Prospect Hill. Doctor assures me the sounds are of mechanical origin. He reminds us of his generous donations to the Flood Memorial Fund. No further action required. Below the sheriff's signature, someone, perhaps a clerk, penciled a faint note. Heard it myself, not mechanical. That single line is all that remains of dissent in those years. What followed was methodical. Tilling expanded the infirmary, hiring new staff from outside Johnstown. German nurses, Polish attendants, a chemist from Philadelphia who later vanished without record. He established a laboratory in the basement, officially for the study of neural resonance and post-mortem sensory activity. Unofficially, he had begun experimenting on the dying. Patients from the miners' wards, men crushed or poisoned by gas, were brought to him under the pretense of palliative care. Witnesses recalled wagons leaving the infirmary at night, covered with tarpaulins heading toward the hills. No bodies were buried in the town cemetery. He claimed his work would lead to the detection of death before it occurred, a way to save the living by listening to the dying. It sounded noble, even visionary. The newspapers called it Tilling's Law of Pre-Mortem Sound. The town, desperate for redemption after the flood, needed a miracle worker. They got something else. In the minutes of a closed meeting of the Johnstown Medical Board, April 1900, one physician questioned the morality of Tilling's studies. The record notes his name as Dr. Horatio M. Bell, and his objection was simple. If he claims the dying produce a tone, what instrument can measure it without destroying the subject? The answer came in Tilling's own handwriting. The human ear, properly trained. That night, Bell resigned his post. His family left town within a week. 2 months later, their home caught fire. No investigation followed. From this point onward, Johnstown's silence hardened into ritual. The press deferred to the doctors deferred to Tilling, and Tilling deferred only to his work, or whatever he believed spoke through it. The few who tried to intervene found themselves isolated. Nurse testimonies from 1901 mention a hum that followed them home and a feeling that something listens when you breathe. They were dismissed for hysteria. There was also the matter of the Prospect Fund, a financial trust supposedly meant to rebuild the town's public health infrastructure. In reality, it funneled money into Tilling's research. Records show payments to suppliers in Boston and Baltimore for acoustic devices, brass frequency forks, and containment vessels. What those vessels contained was never described. By 1902, whispers began spreading among miners and steelworkers. Stories of children seen walking the hill at night, holding hands, humming tunelessly in the dark. Some claimed they were Tilling's patients. Others swore they were the same twins who'd survived the flood. The sheriff's office dismissed the sightings as folklore. Yet, in one preserved telegram from January 14, 1903, a night watchman at the Stonebridge Works reported 2 small figures seen standing by the river, looked wet, when approached, vanished into mist, heard low tone continue after. 3 days later, Tilling was found dead in his study. The cause was officially stroke, but the autopsy is missing from county files. The only surviving note in the handwriting of his assistant reads, "Auditory canal ruptured from within, expression peaceful." After his death, the infirmary shut down. The staff dispersed. The building decayed, yet the system he built, the habit of silence, did not die with him. When inspectors finally entered the structure in 1904, they found the records burned, the charts erased, and the instruments buried under sheets of lead. But in the archives of the Pennsylvania Department of Health, one final memorandum survives. Dated June 5, 1904, and signed by an unnamed state official, it reads, "Recommend immediate sealing of lower levels, acoustic contamination possible, maintain cover story of structural unsafety, no further publication." Below, an annotation in different ink, "Do not let them lie. Steen again." The phrase acoustic contamination appears nowhere else in 19th century medical literature. It's as if the state itself struggled to name what it had inherited, a sound that could not be unheard, a tone that might pass between the living. And so the system continued its work in silence. Files disappeared. Names were erased. The town rebuilt itself on the surface, while beneath it something else, something older, quieter, and far more patient, continued to hum. In later years, when the steel mills closed and the population thinned, a few researchers from the university came to study the ruins. They brought recorders, instruments, and skepticism. Most found nothing. But one tape, made in 1910 by a student named Lydia Crane, remains sealed in the Johnstown Historical Collection. The archivist's log lists its contents simply as unidentified frequency, human-like tone, duration 23 seconds. The log adds one more line, written decades later, perhaps by a curator who dared to play it once. You can hear them breathe. When I first arrived in Johnstown, the archives were colder than the river outside. You could hear the faint hiss of the dehumidifiers fighting to preserve what the flood hadn't already taken. On my first night, the custodian handed me a key and said, "Don't stay past midnight. The light flickers in the Tilling files." He said it as a joke, but his eyes didn't follow the smile. I began with the municipal records, the birth certificates, the post-flood relief ledgers. At first glance, the years between 1889 and 1903 looked unremarkable. Steady recovery, civic pride, new construction. But the names told another story. 47 deaths, as the journal had claimed, most listed as cardiac arrest, pulmonary failure, hysterical seizure. The handwriting, however, was always the same, that neat, slanted cursive belonging to Dr. Ezra Tilling. That's when I requested access to Box 44A, a set of sealed medical correspondences supposedly sent from Johnstown to the Pennsylvania Medical Society between 1891 and 1902. The clerk hesitated, then said softly, "That box isn't meant to be opened." She was wrong. It was meant to be opened, just not by anyone prepared to sleep afterwards. Inside, bound with cotton thread, were letters Tilling had written to a Boston acoustician named Dr. Jonas Reed. The tone was polite, methodical, scholarly, until it wasn't. "Dear Reed," one letter began, "you once asked what lies between silence and death. I have found the threshold. The twins can hear it, the residual hum that precedes cessation. I believe it is not the end of sound, but its beginning." He included sketches of instruments, spiraling diagrams of frequency curves, and notations labeled Patient E and Patient T. I assume those stood for Eleanor and Tabitha, the twins. The last letter, dated January the 12th, 1903, was never sent. It was found sealed in his desk drawer after his death. The tone grows stronger. They wake before it. Sometimes it lingers after the passing, as if something remains unfinished. I fear it listens back. The ink trailed off into a smear. That same night, he died in his study. I kept reading, unable to stop, as though the language itself had gravity. The more I read, the more the space around me seemed to tighten. The whir of the lights slowed. The hum of the vent deepened into a single steady pitch. I told myself it was fatigue. The archivist later told me others had reported the same sensation when handling the Tilling materials. They called it the echo. 2 months later, I visited the site of the Prospect Hill Infirmary. The building is gone now, leveled in the 1950s, but the foundation remains, half swallowed by the hillside. Locals call it the Hollow, and they say the ground there never freezes. I brought a recorder. I told myself it was for documentation, but I know now it was something else. Curiosity, maybe penance. The air was still that evening, unnaturally so. The birds stopped calling as I descended the slope, and then, faintly, like breath behind a wall, I heard it. 2 tones rising and falling together, never quite in harmony. When I played the tape back later, the sound wasn't there, only static, but beneath the static, just barely, there was something that made the technician stop the reel. He replayed it 3 times before saying quietly, "There's a voice underneath." He was right. It wasn't speech exactly, but cadence, a rhythm like language submerged in water. He boosted the frequencies, slowed the speed, and finally, with a look I'll never forget, he said, "It's saying a name." It was mine. That was when I understood why Tilling burned his notes. He hadn't discovered death's sound. He'd opened the door between hearing and being heard. Every listener became a participant. As I continued my research, patterns emerged in local history. Fires, sudden illness, families leaving without explanation. The pattern followed those who handled the materials, the clerk who logged the journal, the inspector who reopened the infirmary site, the university student who recorded the tone in 1910, each gone within a year of exposure. And always the same notation in the coroner's ledger. Cerebral hemorrhage, Probable cause: shock. The official story says the case was closed in 1904, but letters in the State Health Department show a different version. A small team dispatched from Harrisburg to collect remaining auditory instruments and sensitive material. Their field report, partially preserved, concludes with a line that has never left me. Containment incomplete. The hum persists underground. I returned to Johnstown one last time before leaving the project. The archivist, the same woman who'd warned me, was waiting at the door. She pressed something into my hand, a fragment of metal, curved like a hearing horn, engraved with the initials E.T. She said, "It's yours now. It always finds someone." That night, in my hotel, I woke to the sound of rain on the window, but underneath it, faintly, was that same low tone. Not loud, not near, just present. It rose and fell like breathing. I turned on the recorder, but before I could hit play, both bulbs in the lamp flickered and went out. Silence. Except it wasn't silence. It was waiting. Somewhere, far off, a train whistle moaned along the river valley, and for a moment it matched the pitch exactly, as if the land itself was learning to speak in that buried frequency. They say time heals everything, but in Johnstown, time doesn't heal. It listens. The records call it the Tilling collection, though almost nothing in it bears the doctor's name. I first encountered it in 1953 in a back room of the Pennsylvania State Archive, mislabeled under Medical Correspondence Anomalous. The box smelled of mildew and coal dust. On its lid, a faint stamp read, "Property of Commonwealth, not for public release." Inside, a series of brittle folders, dates between 1905 and 1921, typed memos, all in the same clipped bureaucratic tone, documenting the handling of something referred to only as the material. That phrase appears 38 times. Never once is it defined. The first memo from 1905 instructs the relocation of sealed artifacts from Cambria County to the Philadelphia Institute of Pathological Acoustics. The justification: for long-term containment and study of anomalous wave behavior. No public record confirms that such an institute ever existed. A follow-up note from 1908 refers to residual emissions continuing from the Johnstown site. By 1911, those emissions were listed as non-measurable yet reportable, as if even to name them was to participate. The language grows cautious, evasive, until by 1915 it becomes confessional. Operators report dreams involving twins, refrain from extended observation of the devices. No one signed the memo. Between 1916 and 1918, the entries cease altogether. War has a way of swallowing silence. When the records resume in 1920, the handwriting is new, younger, faster, uncertain. An archivist named Clara Henley was tasked with cataloguing materials from defunct medical collections. Her notes, recovered only partially, tell a story the state preferred not to remember. She writes of receiving a box of personal effects, 2 lockets, 1 child's shoe, and an instrument resembling a stethoscope with 2 hollow tubes. She tested it once. Then, in the margin of her logbook, in smaller script, heard whisper, frequency beyond recordable range, do not test again. In June of that year, Clara vanished on her walk home from the depot. Her umbrella was found beside the Monongahela River. The papers list her as missing, presumed drowned. 3 months later, a memo appears from her supervisor. Reassign Tilling materials to cold storage, room 23. No further review without clearance. Room 23 was later sealed. The reason? Humidity issues. When I located room 23 50 years later, it was a wall. Plaster over bricks, no door, no hinges. The blueprints show no trace it ever existed. And yet on that same floor, under a forgotten stairwell, I found a smaller vault. Inside, a reel-to-reel recorder, oxidized and broken, several notebooks, and a fragment of etched glass with faint concentric circles burned into its surface. The notebook bore Clara's handwriting. The last entry reads, "They only scream before death when someone is listening. When no one listens, they hum." She underlined that last word twice. After that, the trail goes dark until 1950, when a university acoustician named Dr. Robert Frey requested access to unidentified Johnstown frequencies. His proposal claimed that certain post-flood artifacts might preserve acoustic residue of traumatic events, what he called psychogenic reverberation. The board granted him limited access. He lasted 6 weeks. His widow later testified that in the nights before his death, he complained of a ringing that moved through walls. The coroner listed his cause of death as cardiac arrest. Probable shock. No one questioned the phrase. They'd used it before. The surviving pages from Frey's journal mirror Tilling's almost word for word. The tone is constant. It increases when observed. It knows when it's being written. The line that follows is smudged but legible enough. It's not a sound at all. It's a tension itself. I stopped my research there, or tried to, but attention, once given, doesn't return empty. Over the years, I've met descendants of the flood survivors, unaware of the names in their family ledgers. Some still live on Prospect Hill. They describe nights when the house creaks in rhythm, as if matching something outside. A few have reported sleep paralysis. One woman told me she hears 2 voices when she's alone, one low, one higher, both whispering just before a neighbor passes away. She asked if I thought it was hereditary. I didn't answer. The county's new museum plans to open an exhibit on the Johnstown Flood next year. They've restored photographs, survivor letters, even a partial reconstruction of the Tilling Clinic facade. They asked if I'd donate any of my research materials. I told them no, because some history isn't preserved. It waits, and when you give it a voice, it continues. Before leaving the archive, I made one final inspection of the old courthouse basement, the place where the original box was found. There's a mark still visible on the stone floor, a faint circular stain, as if something once stood there, humming itself into the walls. The custodian told me the lights still flicker in that room. He said the bulbs always die in pairs. Sometimes, when the power cuts, the silence feels heavier than it should, like air filled with a tone too low to hear but impossible to ignore. It lasts a few seconds, then fades. But I've learned that when it fades, it doesn't disappear. It just moves on to the next listener. Johnstown rebuilt. Its people moved on. But under the river, under the steel, something still listens. And sometimes when the wind moves just right through the valley, the sound returns, twin tones rising through the fog. Some secrets, buried in Johnstown, may never be fully revealed. But if you ever hear 2 voices calling your name in perfect unison, do not answer, because by then it's already listening to you. What do you think of this story? Was everything truly revealed? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe, ring the bell, and share it with someone who loves dark history. Until next time, keep your ears open, but be careful what you listen for.